There was something I misunderstood for a very long time. And it wasn't addiction. It wasn't marriage. It wasn't even my husband. It was what I believed a healthy relationship between a parent and their adult child looked like. My first marriage had shown me one unhealthy extreme. The man I married had very little respect for his mother. He expected everything from her while giving very little in return. So, when that marriage ended and I eventually met my second husband, I thought I had finally found the opposite. He adored his mother. He spoke gently to her. He sought her advice. He valued her opinion. I remember thinking, this is beautiful. I thought I was looking at respect. Years later, I realized I was looking at something very different. Before we got married, he told me we would be living with his mother. The way he described it sounded completely normal. He told me she had her own life. He had his. It sounded like two independent adults simply sharing a home. Considering everything I had experienced before, I saw it as a green flag. Looking back now, I wasn't recognizing health. I was simply comparing one unhealthy extreme to another. Within weeks of getting married, something started feeling off. Every morning, after my husband left for work, his mother would sit me down. At first, the conversations seemed harmless. Then they became personal. One morning, she told me perhaps there was something wrong with me because I hadn't become pregnant yet. We had only been married a few months. She said her son had already been tested, which is odd enough to say. Then she said that maybe I should find out if I could even have children. Another day, she casually told me about all the beautiful women she had introduced him to before he met me. Then she smiled and said he never seemed interested in beautiful women. I remember sitting there completely confused. I wasn't raised around manipulation. I wasn't raised around conversations where the real message hid beneath the words. So I stayed quiet, trying to understand why another woman would speak to her son's wife that way. Then, every evening, my husband came home, and suddenly she became warm again. It was as though the woman I had spent the entire day with disappeared the moment he walked through the door. When I tried telling him what had been happening, he genuinely struggled to believe me. Not because he thought I was lying, because the woman I described wasn't the mother he had always known. That realization stayed with me. Sometimes we don't question what we've always known. We simply call it normal. As time went on, I noticed something else. Almost every important decision somehow revolved around his mother's approval. Not because she demanded it every time, because somewhere during childhood he had learned that disappointing her meant becoming a bad son. If you've been taught that saying no makes you selfish, how do you ever become your own person? How do you build your own marriage? How do you protect your own children? I don't think he saw himself as trapped. I think he genuinely believed he was doing what Allah wanted from him. That realization broke my heart, because the Islam I had been taught looked very different. The more I studied my faith, the more I realized Islam is built on balance. Honoring your parents does not mean abandoning your marriage. Protecting your spouse is not betraying your mother. No relationship was ever meant to replace God as the center of your decisions. That balance had quietly disappeared inside our home. One conversation has stayed with me ever since. His mother once told me to prepare a list of jobs for my husband every weekend before he had a chance to make plans for himself. Keep him busy. Always have something for him to do. I remember feeling deeply uncomfortable, not because spouses shouldn't help each other, but because I didn't want to manage another adult. I wanted my husband to have dreams, to become the man God created him to be, not someone spending his life trying to earn approval that could never quite be earned. Years later, I understood why that conversation disturbed me. It wasn't partnership. It was control. The kind of control she had over him, subtle but strong. As time went on, I started setting boundaries, not because I wanted conflict, because healthy relationships need them. But every time I did, somehow the conversation became about me. I was made to feel that having boundaries meant I wasn't respectful, that disagreeing meant I wasn't patient enough, that speaking up meant I wasn't a good wife. Eventually, my husband and his mother would sit me down together. They genuinely believed they were correcting me, but it was done with so much anger and disrespect. One day I became so overwhelmed and cornered during their meetings that I quietly excused myself to the bathroom. They had taken my purse, but my phone was still in my pocket. I texted my father, "Please come get me right now. Make it look like you are dropping something off." When he arrived, my mother-in-law followed me to my dad's car to ensure I returned. When she told me father to send me back, he said something I'll never forget. "I am her father. My door will always be open. First, I will hear my daughter's side." For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. When I finally decided it is time to leave, I became pregnant. My husband was so excited to tell my mother-in-law. The next morning, after my husband left for work, I proudly showed her the tiny baby clothes I had bought. She looked at me and said, "Don't get too excited. I had miscarriages too." I remember standing there holding those tiny clothes, wondering why someone, especially a grandmother, would answer joy with fear. For years I asked, why would she say that? Eventually I asked a different question. What kind of trauma creates conversations like that? That question didn't excuse what happened, but it changed how I understood it. What I eventually learned through psychology is that generational trauma often repeats itself until someone decides to interrupt it. Understanding that helped me let go of hatred, but never responsibility. My husband didn't choose the environment he was raised in. He didn't choose the beliefs he absorbed as a little boy. But once he became a husband, and later a father, his responsibility changed. At some point, every adult reaches the same crossroads. We either continue repeating what shaped us, or we begin healing what shaped us, and that is something he chose not to do. No parent can make that decision for us. No spouse can make it. No child can make it. Only we can. Looking back, I don't wish he had been perfect. I wish he had realized sooner that protecting his wife and children was never disobeying God or his mother. It was what Allah had entrusted him with, his biggest priorities, that he was taught to keep as secondary. People often ask me where I found the strength to leave. The truth is, I don't know if I would have. Not for myself. For a long time, I believed that if I became more patient and forgiving, eventually things would change. I kept waiting for the marriage I believed we could have. Instead, I slowly lost the one person I was responsible for protecting, myself. Then I looked at my daughter. And suddenly, this wasn't only my story anymore. Children may not understand every conversation, but they understand what home feels like. They know when peace is missing. I realized she was growing up inside an environment I had spent years convincing myself was normal, and I couldn't let that become normal for her too. So I left, not because I hated anyone, because I loved her. For a long time, I thought leaving meant I had failed. Today, I see it differently. I wasn't running away. I was interrupting a cycle where guilt had been mistaken for love, where fear had been mistaken for respect, where obedience had been mistaken for righteousness. Years later, I realized something else. The wounds we refuse to heal don't simply disappear. They often find another way to surface. That became the next chapter of my story. But this chapter taught me something I will carry for the rest of my life. The source of our pain, and the responsibility to heal it, are not always the same person. Someone else may have wounded you. They may even be the reason those wounds exist, but no one else can heal them for you. That is one of adulthood's hardest truths. You can love your parents deeply, honor them, care for them, pray for them, and still become the adult Allah created you to be. You are supposed to build your own family. You are allowed to protect your marriage. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to set boundaries with kindness. And if you inherit wounds you never asked for, you also inherit the responsibility to make sure they don't reach the next generation. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson this chapter of my life ever gave me. Not that broken people exist. We all know they do. The lesson was that compassion and accountability can exist together. I can understand why someone became who they are, without allowing that understanding to become permission for them to keep hurting others. Because every cycle continues until someone decides it ends with them. For me, that decision began the day I chose my daughter over my fear. When I look back now, that isn't the day I broke my family. It's the day I finally began protecting it. And I have never regretted that decision.